There are ways to lessen the power of groupthink, and you know, if leaders, we're going back to the groupthink, not bystander intervention now, which is all related. But going back, remember we talked about groupthink, which groups tend to get caught up in it. Groupthink is where we all think the same thoughts and we're not really free to think other thoughts, to think as individuals, we think as a group. If a leader will encourage discussion without promoting their own opinion, I think that's just good common sense. If you really want to know what people in the group think, don't tell them what to think. You know, if we occasionally will have what we call student focus groups here. I don't know if any of you, probably none of you have been in a student focus group yet, where we want to learn something about some aspect of the college. You know, what do you think about it? Is this fair? Is this good? Whatever. Well, if we went in and we have prepared, we very carefully prepared whoever's facilitating this, which is, as we try not to have like President Avery or me or somebody facilitate it, just because of the authority figure, okay, which can, even that can skew things. People can say what they think you want to hear, okay? And we very carefully prepare word for word how they're supposed to present this focus group to try not to bias it in any way, because we want to hear the students express themselves. Well, if I went in and I was facilitating a student focus group, and I went in and I said, you know, some people thought that think the teachers are being unfair. I don't think that, but I want to know what you think. Or I don't think that because, and I give all these, you know, 3-point outline why it's not true. Well, there occasionally will be a student that would have to say, well, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. But you're going to skew it, okay? And there's been many times I've led discussions, whether it's at the school here, in the church, at the conference level, whatever, and I have done my best not to present or interject my views until I hear the discussion, okay? And so if you don't want groupthink, and a good leader doesn't want groupthink when you're discussing things. Okay, now you can still have consensus and harmony in the end, but you really want people to be able to express themselves if you really want to learn what is best. And a good leader will also encourage dissenting opinions. I have done that here when, not that I'm a good leader, but I've done that here when I would say, if we're discussing a topic and we're not sure, it's kind of a tough one, I'll tell somebody, now your assignment for the next meeting is to come in and convince us of this position. And then I'll tell another one, your assignment in this meeting is to convince us of this position, and they're different positions. That kind of works for me. I need to hear both sides and on a lot of issues. And I've done the same thing. I've argued the opposite side of what everybody else was arguing just to see if they really believed what they believed. And sometimes I found that they really did believe it because I got attacked today. And that was good. That was a good thing. Now, if I can do that and they say, yeah, you know, I think you're right, then, well, we need to talk about this a little more because we're not sure. You can also lessen groupthink by splitting into subgroups for discussion. We've done that a lot. We do that a lot with the accreditation process, the assessment process. We hardly ever do that as one big group. You know, we break up into several groups and discuss these things, and then we bring them back and we look at what the different groups have come up with in order to evaluate, so nobody's being controlled by one dominant person in it. Include in meetings a time to review decisions and to entertain new information. Have you ever agreed to something and then later on said, you know, now that I think about that a little bit more, I don't think I'm in agreement with that. I did that at a meeting last summer, connected with our church conference. And it was a pretty big decision that we were making. It had some ramifications for ministry and even some people. And I I agreed to something, voted for something, and then after I got to thinking about it, I thought, I'm not sure if I still feel that same way. And I can remember I asked if we could meet again, and we met again. I said, guys, I know what I did and how I voted, and I'm not changing, because I feel pretty strongly that if you're on a committee or a board, you speak as a committee or a board. Okay? You know, I might be outvoted, but I don't think it's really good to go out of there and say, well, I didn't agree with them, but this is what they said. You know, I'm not saying that's unethical. I just don't think it's professional. Yes.
I've been in situations where in a group setting there was a bunch of different things brought up, and then we'd seemingly come to a decision and then something else would be brought up, and by the time it had gone around so much that we were so exhausted from it that I think the leader got his way.
Yes.
Because he just exasperated.
It's a good point. That can happen. You just kind of lose the energy for the debate. Yeah. But, you know, in that case, I did bring it up, and we discussed it, and we didn't change the vote. I would have if I could, but we didn't change the vote. We stuck with it, but I brought up some real concerns, and it bothered me because I really would have voted differently. But, you know, I still would have been outvoted there. But so that can happen, and but if you have a time when you can review these things, you know, we do that occasionally. We review it and we say, you know, that looked like a good decision at the time, but it's really not working out like we thought it would. I mean, we're imperfect people, okay? You don't have to, if you make a decision, it doesn't have to be forever. You know, wisdom sometimes says, bad decision, okay? It sounded good at the time, but it just isn't working. It's just not good for us. And so we do that occasionally. And a good leader will allow time for review, look at it, look back and assess it. I mean, we assess everything at GBS, it seems. Do we, you know, is this working? This is what we wanted to happen. Is it happening? If it's not happening, let's drop it. There's times we've dropped goals that we had set for God's Bible School because it wasn't working. It didn't work out like we thought it would. It was the wrong approach. It wasn't effective. Sometimes we looked at it wasn't effective, but it's because we weren't working it as well as we could have. And so we try to work it. Invite input from outsiders. I mentioned that before. I mentioned about bringing in somebody to campus or to your church. That's an excellent thing. And get somebody to church that's totally, you know, they're not familiar with it. And tell them, give us your reaction. What do you think when you come to our church? And you might be disappointed with what they say. You know, well, it didn't seem very friendly. I couldn't find any place. You have no signs for anything. Looked a little sloppy and unkept. You know, I mean, those are things you probably need to hear.
Yeah, and I've heard that they've had like secret shoppers who they actually are employed by groups to go for churches and give exactly that kind of.
Well, businesses do that too. Restaurants do that a lot. Matter of fact, I was a secret shopper for a restaurant for a while. It was cool, man. You could just eat and they'd pay for it. Yeah. Really neat. Critique the place, and I always wanted to get in one of those really nice restaurants, but I never succeeded in that. But I still ate free food and critiqued them. And but that's why they do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody comes in, how do they greet you? How was the food? Was the place clean? You know, and you just evaluate them, send it in, and
At what point do you stop gathering information? Because is it possible you could gather so much information that it really confuses the situation?
yeah, I would think you can. Thinking of GBS?
No, I'm not.
Well, the reason I laugh at that is when we went into the assessment mode, we really got into it. And I was at the time chairing the assessment committee, and it was brand new. I mean, we did some, but we expanded it, and we really looked at how do we prove what we are and what we're doing. And when the accreditors came, one of the things they said was, I can't believe how effective your assessment is. I mean, they really were. They were very complimentary. They actually said you could teach a lot of colleges and universities how to do assessment. that said, wow, I don't think you can maintain this much assessment. And we knew we couldn't. I mean, we don't do everything every year now like we used to. I mean, you should have been here when we first started this. I mean, it was like a list of things every year that we did because we had to collect data. Now, if you collect some of it every 2, 3, 5 years, that's all you need. And yeah, I think you can probably overdo it. But I don't know that you should ever stop assessment. Now,
I think too that like initial assessment, you tend to need more information
yes.
than ongoing assessment.
Yeah, and that's what we felt in here. Okay. All right. Somebody else? Okay. Invite input from outsiders. Encourage group members to take different positions and to examine alternatives. I already mentioned that. There's a concept called inoculation, and we'll conclude with this. Influence someone to formulate a strong case by presenting a weak case for the opposite view. Now, this is a little bit manipulative, but this makes it easy for the person to create an opposing argument, position you intend for them to easily formulate against your own weak argument. I don't know if that's what I did intentionally when I was talking to you about the teaching Bible at the school in Pell City, where I did compared Calvinism with Arminianism, and I did the tulip approach. Because I think I gave it a fair explanation, but I'm sure it was done with bias on my part, and so that might be something similar to this. But you know, if you're trying to convince somebody of something, and I don't even know if this is always intentional, because if I really believe something and somebody comes up and says, what do you think about this topic? Well, I would typically explain both views if there's like opposing views. Now, which do you think I'm going to explain most strongly and most passionately is what I believe. So probably you do this almost naturally. But it is a very effective thing. It can change people's opinions if you give them this kind of a idea, you know, and you know, they see this. Now on page 168, if I can get to 168. Francis Schaeffer kind of took this approach. Francis Schaeffer was, in his day, the most effective Christian apologist, probably the most famous Christian apologist and Christian philosopher that there was. And he thought that Christians should teach children a broad knowledge of secular philosophy, but teach it with the Bible as the standard. In other words, you're letting them know what these people believe, but you're putting in the light of Scripture. And his reason for that was, if they see this, it's not something new, it's not something fresh and interesting to explore, it's something that's been presented from a biblical perspective. And I think there's some validity to that. And that's the idea of inoculation that he's talking about. And Francis Schaeffer did that very well. He has a film series out. What's the name of it? How Shall We Then Live, I think. Is that it? And he goes through all these different aspects. Summit Ministries does the same thing from Manitou Springs, Colorado. And it's a Christian worldview presentation. And it was probably the most popular class we had in Pell City, because you have all of these presentations of what's going on in this world, but then you have this very strong biblical response to what's going on. And it used this same concept. And I think that's, and you read through, and even Paul in the Scriptures did some of this, and he presented the other side.